Welcome to the Eventual Millionaire Podcast with your host, Jaime Tardy. Real talk and real advice from real millionaires with a sharp focus on you, the eventual millionaire.
Welcome to the Eventual Millionaire Podcast. I'm Jaime Tardy, and today we have Andrew Darbyshire on the show. Andrew owns a company called Pacsoft, and he also wrote the book called Think Big and Live Large, and I'm really excited to talk to him today. I think it's really cool because actually how we connected is I got a random phone call and I didn't know who it was from, and apparently it was from Andrew. He had heard about the millionaire interviews. He's a millionaire. He said, I'm from Portland, Maine. I have an office there. He's actually out in Australia. From Australia. And we ended up having drinks, and I really got a great chance to know him, and I asked him to be on the show. So thank you so much for coming on today, Andrew.
Thanks, Jaime. It's a pleasure.
So let me start off with something I actually read in your book. Normally I talk about the business, and we're definitely going to get into that. But this one thing really intrigued me from the book, and I don't know if I can post it so everyone can see it, but I'm going to read that. That's a report card from you, and I'm going to read it because I think this is really interesting. And this was in 1975 that the report card came out, and it says, although Andrew has ability, he has an overrated opinion of his ability. He must learn that blindly thinking he will conquer all will not get him by. He must start to listen, think, and apply, and above all, stop fooling around. If he comes down to earth, he may do well in the electrical field. Now, I thought that was huge, and I wanted to read that on the show so everybody sort of has an idea on what you were like as a kid. So apparently a teacher thought that you were sort of fooling around too much. How did that work, and how did that progress to where you are now? Did you think it was an asset or a liability?
It's an asset because I haven't changed.
See, I remember us talking about that before. So tell me why that's a good thing.
Because I the most important thing to do, I think, in life, or the three most important things are to have good mentors that are either close to you or people you observe, to seize opportunities and continue to be persistent with them, but most importantly is to dream. I think it was Einstein who said that imagination is more important than knowledge. And when you have a vision and a dream, how you get there, the journey is more fun than the outcome. And there's been many experiences I've had in business and in life where the dreams do come true.
So how did you do that? And like I said, we'll talk about your business in just a little bit. But how did you vision? Like, how do you envision stuff, and how do you dream?
Things come to you sometimes. A recent example, not so much business related, but it's an example of how it happens. In about 2001, my daughter was very sick in hospital for 2 months, and I'd spend these horrible days looking out the window across the park of the Children's Hospital in Melbourne, and in the distance was the Royal Melbourne Zoo, and I immediately got a vision as to why there wasn't a relationship between the zoo and the hospital. After 12 years of people saying that I was absolutely crazy, lobbying, dealing with bureaucrats and government, the Queen opened a new hospital next door to the old one last October, and the biggest feature of the hospital was a meerkat enclosure, which was the outcome of that dream.
So you were looking out the window, you just had this crazy idea that you should blend the two, and then how many years later it actually came true?
12 years, and lots of roadblocks along the way, lots of bureaucrats and people who couldn't see that vision, who thought it was absolutely insane.
So what made you keep going, though? I mean, especially if you ran into so many roadblocks.
Because I knew it was a significant vision, and it just had to happen in my mind. I wanted to have a legacy to my daughter's experience and something positive come out of it. And I just saw the benefits that children would gain from having animals in a hospital. There are now hospitals throughout the world looking at that hospital as a benchmark for what they might do in similar instances. So it's, who'd have thought not that long ago that people would be walking around brushing their fingers across a piece of glass and that would be a phone. Someone had dreamed for that and persisted with it. And the the processes and the experiences that Apple had to go through to find. I think they got Dow Corning involved in inventing a new form of glass in order to achieve that outcome. And if they had just thought, well, there's no glass that can do it, so we can't do it, we'll do a keyboard again, the iPhone and the iPod Touch and those sort of devices and the iPad and all the other tablets would not be around today because someone had a vision and someone decided to track it down. There's an interesting article I heard about the other day called iPencil, and it's not Apple related. It's not an i product, but it's a little three-page document that talks about the fact that not one person in the world has the ability or the knowledge to make a simple pencil. If you think about it, not one person knows, not the same person who knows how to refine the graphite doesn't know how to explore for it, where to find it or how to dig it out of the ground, the processes, the same person who cuts down trees and mills the timber into the pencil, who gets that little bit of graphite up the bit of timber. They're all different people. And I'm reading a very interesting book at the moment called The Rational Optimist, and it talks about this, and it talks about how much a better place the world is today and will continue to become one, even though there's lots of gloom and doom around, because of the collaborative efforts of people throughout the world. And the more people who get involved in developing technology and ideas, the more advanced the world becomes. And every year that goes by, every year that goes by lengthens the average lifespan by 3 months. So it will be possible in a number of years where people will live to 200 because the technology advancements and all the stuff that's going on, and the rise of people out of poverty and persecution is just the rate of change is massive, and it's exciting and it's good.
See, you're talking my language. I love this stuff. I love talking about the advancements in technology. There's a great book by Peter Diamandis. I'm still trying to get him on the show. It's called Abundance, and it really talks about the rate of technology and how fast things are going, and how a long time ago, even JFK, when he was in the White House, doesn't have the capability that somebody in Africa has from one cell phone. You know what I mean? It's really amazing what has changed in just a short amount of time. So imagine 20, 30 years from now, what will change. We can't even predict some of the stuff. That's really interesting, though, about the way that you said it. Why do you think that is? Why do you think us paying more attention and more technically specified to one specific thing, like the graphite people are really specific on that, the timber people are specific on that? Why do you think that's helping?
Well, it's not. It's the combination of them coming together and the mixture of them coming together, and that's one of the reasons. As you mentioned, my office in the United States is in Portland, Maine. Our head office is here in Melbourne, Australia.
Nobody ever comes to Portland, Maine. I'm so excited you did. You have no idea.
Jaime, I spent half of yesterday booking flights to get there. I forgot what I was going to say. Talk about people connecting. Oh, that's right. And I've been looking at whether we're currently involved in a university program where we have 5 MBA graduates over the next 6 months. I'm coming over in 2 weeks' time to spend a weekend with them to brief them. And their thesis, their study for their MBA program, the last semester of their program, is to do a case study and a business plan for my business. And I'm looking at the possibility of moving the head office more west. I'll leave people in Maine, but because it's very hard to get people out of Maine.
I know. That's why I was excited for you to be here.
But I'm going to spend some time in Silicon Valley. And I sat down with a friend of mine the other day, and we were talking about, he had a very successful in Silicon Valley that he started in the mid-70s and built it into $1 billion company, which is still flourishing. I think it was acquired by another company, and they do neurological tests on people, monitoring. And I just wanted to have a chat to him as to why he ended up in Silicon Valley. Well, it was absolutely by circumstance, because his wife was going to the university in San Francisco, and when they first got married. But as circumstance came about, he's sitting there soldering away, building these neurological test devices to go on people's heads. And he's talking to the postman one Saturday morning, and the postman says, "Oh, the guys next door do that." And he nearly wanted to kill him because he thought he had on something special, but they actually didn't do it. What they did was, when he went and knocked on their door, they did printed circuit board assembly. And so from that day to this, they still do the printed board assembly for his, what became a $1 billion company. So one of the reasons why Silicon Valley is the heart of everything is because there are people around that are in the like industry. So there's printed circuit board manufacturers, there's integrated circuit chip manufacturers, there's software engineers abundant, and more importantly, there's venture capitalists. So you can get in the car and see 10 of them in a day. You can't do that so easily in Portland, Maine.
Yeah.
Can't do that in Aspen, Colorado. They're probably spending most of their time there on their holidays, but it just means that business goes where the the heart of a lot of retail businesses is in Minneapolis and in Chicago, because that's where the support mechanisms grew out and together with them. So it became a combination of people working together, and when you actually understand that, acknowledge it, it makes you even more aware that in business that you should stick to what you know and refine that and get very good at it, and not try and do what everybody else does, and not do a half-assed job of it. To actually, marketing is a marketing specialist area. Graphic artwork is a specialist area. If you're a software writer or a builder or any sort of business, you should focus on what you're best at, and not try and do everything to do it on the cheap to save some money. And it takes time to actually accept that and acknowledge it. But when you reverse engineer the successful businesses, that's what they do. They have groups of specialists come together, and it's the sum of the parts that makes something great.
See, it's great to talk about teams, especially because this day and age, anyone can start a business and be yourself and have all the technology to do graphic arts and do all this stuff and assume that that's sort of the best way to go. And sometimes it is. But if you're trying to build a big company or something bigger than just you, you're going to have to branch out and get those people that really matter and that do what they do best comparatively to everybody else. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your business? Because right now, I don't think anybody knows right now what you actually do. So why don't you tell us about what Pacsoft is and sort of how you started it?
Pacsoft is a software company. We produce software for lumber and hardware stores throughout the world. We've got around about 2,000 clients spread between Australia, New Zealand, the Pacific Islands, and North America, of course. And how I started it was by accident. I had a background in electronics and engineering, in broadcast engineering, and I always had this urge to be in my own business because I came from a family of business people. They were builders, and my father went broke in the credit crunch of the 70s, and I watched that and what that did to him. And he gave up and he drove a taxi for 25 years because he knew he could eat what he caught, and no one would take it away from him as they did in the building. And he instilled, watching what happened to him, instilled a strong sense of a need of financial independence within me. And to this day, that's probably the bedrock of what drives me, is to be financially independent and to provide well for my children. And I must say I've far exceeded what my expectations were. My expectations initially, when I was in my late teens, early 20s, was to own a house when I got married, and to be able to provide, hopefully for my children's private education. I now have got houses spread in a number of countries, and we go on holidays to exotic locations, and they're very fortunate in their life. But I still constantly review what I'm doing and think about why I'm doing it, and a good bit of doubt is also handy from time to time to keep you from the cliff knife edge. But anyhow, I was working in electronics, and I was living in Santa Clara in 1979, working for a company over here, learning a new product for broadcast stations to do with FM radio stations. And I can remember being there when Steve Jobs moved out of his garage and started Apple and moved it into a factory because everybody was talking about it around the lunch cart. And I then came back here and worked for a number of other people. I was involved in scientific instrumentation and involved technical machines for the F-18 fighter jet project, and I was back in Massachusetts in the East Coast, Silicon Valley, at a company called Genrad, being trained for a couple of months by a really neat guy called Al Guy was his name, and his best mate was Ken Olson, who had formed DEC back in the late 60s. And he had all sorts of stories, and he was a mentor to a degree for me. And when I came back here, I was doing that for a year or two, and I just had this urge inside of me to start my own business, and I didn't know how I was going to do it or what I was going to do. But I used the skills I'd learned in electronic engineering and broadcasting, and I started manufacturing some broadcast equipment at night time and selling that. Taught myself software programming on the kitchen table, and at the same time reverse engineered accounting and created an accounting product. And as you read out, I left school when I was 15 and I failed math. So to learn the formulas to calculate something simple like gross profit, I had to sit there and mess around with the math until I came out with the right answer. But when you learn something that way, you don't forget it. It's still forever.
Well, what made you decide to go that route? If you failed math, what made you decide to make accounting software? It seems like that would be not something that you would normally choose.
Didn't think about it at the time. I'd forgotten, I think.
I forgot that I failed math, so it didn't matter anymore.
I just kept going and learn. And so ultimately I had to leave my full-time employment because it was just the opportunities were there, and I rented a $35 a week office in a very, very dodgy part of town, went out and bought $200 worth of secondhand furniture, painted up the office, and I was in business and lived off a MasterCard for 6 months, and slowly sat down, got some sales tapes from a company called Spray, which was an English sales training thing, sort of like a John Cleese sales thing. Sat at home all weekend, went through the tapes diligently, wrote down the steps of selling, and went out and did it one foot in front of the time. I'd get the yellow pages, I'd pick out some businesses, I'd send them lead letters. Every week I'd send out 20 lead letters, follow them up with a phone call, lots of rejection. You get one lead, you might get one sale in 100, but just kept on going about it, and it slowly grew. And one day, by circumstance, I got a lead for a hardware store that wanted a system, and I went and saw him and showed him what I was selling, someone else's product I was selling, and he decided to go with NCR, a big corporation. And so probably the best letter I've ever written in my life was a letter of thanks for his time, which is there's a copy in the book, as you probably know. And to my surprise, 6 months later, he rang me and said, "It's not working, come and see me." So I went down, and by that stage I'd started writing my own software. And he said, "I've got confidence in you." And I sat in his hardware store for 6 months and wrote the system, which is today the cornerstone of what we've got a couple of thousand clients around the world with. Of course, it's evolved. It's been rewritten for Windows.
Oh, yeah.
A team of developers now, and I'm not that stuck in it. I work out the strategic direction and what we're doing with iOS technology and all that sort of stuff, which I think is very disruptive and which is good to be at the edge of it. And away we went.
So what I want to do is sort of go back a little bit, because number one, you told us that your dad had sort of failed in business and went back to a job. What made you decide that it was a good idea to go in business, especially like you said, the first 6 months you sort of were running off MasterCard and getting rejections all the time? Like, if you had such a background of it might not work, what made you keep going even though it didn't sound like it was working at first?
Well, you get little snippets of success along the way that keep you going. So, and that you to this day you yearn for those peaks. And when I've got friends that are doing it tough, I say just look from one peak to the next. Forget about the valley, because you'll go from one peak to the next, but you do often traverse the valley along the way. And it's a matter of keeping that vision clearly in your mind. And I'm not saying it was easy. For 15 years I worked 16 hours a day, often 6 and 7 days a week. But I did it because I enjoyed it, and I did what I enjoyed doing. And, slowly built a team of people and came over there in 93 and took over the business in Portland, Maine. And since then I've commuted a lot, which is fortunate. I love flying. In fact, after about 6 or 8 weeks, I get quite antsy in one spot. So it's it's just being committed. And I know a lot of people do run out of money and end up going out of business, but often it's this whole 90s / turn of this millennium view that it's acceptable to have a cash burn figure. I think that's a load of hogwash. Business 101 is the money coming in has to be more than the money going out. And opportunities will come and they'll go, and you might miss a whole heap of opportunities because you don't invest a heap of money that you don't have and try and get technology. But of the success stories we hear, there are thousands of failures. And the trick is to work towards success and not away from failure, but also be aware that it is there, and to not blindly spend money. People will blindly spend money. They'll take on, and some of the most successful businesses were started and operated for a long time in someone's living room. Businesses like Facebook and Google, even though they're freaks of nature, I don't think anybody could have planned the vision of where none of them really knew that they were going to be so hugely successful. But they lived on a shoestring for a while until they proved their model, where so many people come into this office with investment memorandums and all sorts of ideas, and I just don't even give them the opportunity now. I'll give people advice, but I won't invest in businesses that people want investment in when they haven't done the hard yards themselves and done it themselves and backed themselves and been prepared to work the extra hours to get the work done. It's a matter of prioritising what you do. I used to, when I was writing programs, I would predominantly write them in the evening because 8:30 to 5 was time I needed to spend in front of prospects selling. So it's foolish to be writing programs when I could be selling and talking to people, but then go home and punch out what needs to be done is in the time frame you need to do it. So I think anybody who thinks they can start a business, work 8:30 to 5, have a stable and balanced family life in the first 5 to 10, 15 years and get capital investment, they're deluding themselves.
See, okay, this is what I want to ask about, because that's what I'm trying to prove, right? I have small kids. I want to build a business. I work 20 hours a week. I'm running into obstacles and going like, I can't push anymore. I can't do anymore because it's just not possible in the time I have. So the hard thing is that most of the time we hear, well, it takes 16-hour days. It takes, making it your top priority. If you had kids at that time, what do you think would have been different?
Probably not a lot, because I suppose it's if you've got kids and you're married to someone, then you've got someone that can share the load and burden with you. And yes, it's good to spend time with your children, of course, but they're also fairly self-sufficient in a lot of ways. And it depends on what the priority is. If the priority is to build something successful in order to provide for your children in the longer term, I think that's a priority in this day and age, because it's going to become more competitive and tougher for children to do the things that we've done, because the world is changing so dramatically. And so if you have the skills and the ability and the drive to do it, then it's a bit like creating a tribe mentality where you're providing the platform for which they may be able to springboard from. And if you think about a lot of the dynasties that are around, that's exactly what's happened. One person's built the hard yards and got some momentum going, then the next generation's got greater momentum going, and then before you know it, it's full steam ahead. But so I guess it's a matter of measuring what is the priority to you. And as I said, my priority was always financial independence because of watching what happened to my father and how he scrapes by. Now he's a happy man, totally happy, but it's not for me from watching what happened to him, the injustice. So I believe that part of fatherhood for me is providing a secure lifestyle for my children.
So I have a question then. So back up for just a second, because you said, I think it's going to be harder in the future for our kids with what's going on and stuff like that. Why? What makes you say that?
Well, technology is simplifying things, and to a degree, even though it's complicating, it's dumbing down things. And there are sectors that are simply disappearing, and they've been replaced by conglomerates. You think of the number of small retailers that have been replaced by Amazon, for instance, that are just, I go for a walk every morning and I look at the retail shops, and I just wonder how there's going to be enough restaurants open to fill their space, because the retail shops are the ones that are saying, oh, it's not affecting me now, are going to get affected. Who would have thought you would have accepted buying clothing over the net? And what's worse now, people go in and they measure their size and their style, and then they go on the web and buy it. So the retailer is just providing a showroom for someone else.
Yeah.
Or books, just don't go and buy books anymore. I know for me, a friend of mine mentioned a book the other day. I would have forgotten about it, except for I had my iPad, pulled it out and got the Kindle version straight away. So what does that put out of business? That puts out print shops. It puts out paper manufacturers, the retail bookstores, the coffee shops that are associated with retail bookstores. All sorts of industry have gone from multiple various types of industries where people can start up small businesses and grow to one large corporate. So even though I'm positive about the future, I'm not too sure I know where it's going, or whether it's going to be that easy for people to start smaller businesses, because unless it's a trade that you can't replicate, such as a building trade, they're never going to, they're going to be impacted, because someone will design more fabricated buildings and those sort of things, which will be built in factories, but not so much the labourers at this stage. But there are sectors of the community that are in strife. Restaurants won't get it because people always want the experience, the entertainment. If you remember, in the 80s, movie theatres were decimated by the VCR, but that came full circle. People wanted to have the experience going out and having that break. So it's really having a vision to pick where the future is and what is going to affect. And at the end of the day, that's one of the reasons why Facebook has been so successful, is because Zuckerberg was, first and foremost, a psychology student. Most people, that gets buried. They think he was just a geek, but he was actually a psychology student who also taught himself programming. And the whole Facebook phenomenon is a social experiment in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I say experiment because I don't believe it's got a longer-term future.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot of articles on the web. I know it doesn't sound like that. So, but I have a question though, because you deal with a lot of iOS stuff, mobile stuff. Where do you see that going in the future?
Huge. And it's huge because it's breaking down the processes to personality-based computing. In our business, for instance, as an example, we have a product optimizer which has accounts receivable, accounts payable, inventory control, and general ledger and point of sale. And it's a monolithic product. It's all one executable on servers, and everybody goes and does every bits and pieces on the software. Whereas we're creating mobile apps, and one of the apps is a report tool, which is a dashboard where they start, and then they can drill down into the data to see what their accounts receivable are, what the ones outstanding are, and click on an account and then click on the transactions that made that balance. So who would use that? The manager would use that, and he'd take it home and he'd use it after work when he's played with his kids and they've gone to bed, and he can analyse his business. Similarly, we've got an application which is a delivery application. So the delivery driver gets his list of deliveries on the iPhone. He delivers it, takes a photograph of the goods on site, signature, stores the transaction in the database.
Everything's
so he
there.
would use that application, where previously someone in the office would print a running sheet for him, a heap of picking slips, he'd go and deliver them, and they'd re-input it. So we've got an inventory management app which the person on the shop floor would use for their inventory count. So it's where these people, employees of a retail store, in our case hardware stores, would have to learn the actual core product to do their job functionality. They only now have to learn a little bit of it, and that's their function. That's their personality. It's computing. So it means that our main desktop server application becomes a lot easier to learn and thinner. And it's a complete paradigm shift once you get your head around it. And I think that's where, let's face it, apps are basically little executable programs that do what a web page does, but it's stable. It's there. It's not, it doesn't resize and all the stuff you go through with web browsers. Nothing more, nothing less. That's all it is, a conduit to data in someone else's server in the cloud in most circumstances. But it's because of that stability and that ease of use that it's been so successful and will continue to be so. There aren't a lot of, I don't think there are a lot of very actual useful apps when you sit down. I often sit down at night or as for some of the apps that are there, and 90% of it's crap. Really.
Wait, I have a really cool flashlight app on my phone, though. It makes it so it's a flashlight, then it's cool, right?
Yeah, I bet you that when you're in that dark restaurant and you're trying to read the menu, you'll forget that it's there to use.
Yeah, I know, right?
That's
probably
to me. It'd probably be interesting to rank the most used apps that I have. In my case, probably the most used app, which I should get rid of because it's only depressing, is Bloomberg to see what's happening with the stock market. If I come back from that, it's email and contacts and diary on my phone. If I'm traveling, it's the weather app. There's a little mortgage calculator app, which is great for working out loans and the pay down process of loans. But other than that, there's not a lot of stuff that I've got that's actually hugely it's not revolutionary stuff. If you've got a calculator app, so what? You had a calculator on your desk for the last 30 years.
I know, it just looks different now.
You could read it in a paper or look at it on web. So it's not, it's very large degree, it's just convenience and subtle change.
Do you see that changing though? Do you see that, do you see the phone becoming the next computer where I could do anything and more with the phone comparatively? Or do you think it'll just sort of be the way it is?
No, you try using, what's it called, Apple Words or whatever it is for the iPad. You use it for 5 seconds. I've used it where I've had the little keyboard and I've just typed in text to then come back to my desktop to format it into a Word document. But at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to sit at a PC and do that stuff. It's not built for that. And I can't, it's lots of stuff, but it's really simple stuff. There's a great app for when you're skiing that tracks your course and your speed and those sort of things. But again, that's not that's a toy. It's an enjoyment thing. So, Skype on a mobile device is a great device, a great thing. But I don't know if anybody's ever done the sums to work out whether it actually saves you money using data download versus analog phone.
Yeah.
And the convenience of it. But it's certainly, there are business applications that are integrated with business processes like what we're doing, I think, that do bring huge efficiencies to businesses. And a lot of the stuff that we do has been possible for the last 30 years on devices.
There goes my phone buzzing right now as we're talking about it.
Message at the beginning, turn your phones off.
I know, right? Oh.
But they're specific. They're very specific to business processes. But I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear from some of your listeners what serious apps they've found that really made a huge difference to their lives.
Yeah, like it makes me want to go and like look through it and find out, like, is any of these, does it really matter? Does any of these really improve anything comparatively to just having fun? I know Twitter and Facebook I use quite often. I'm not really sure how beneficial they are to my life. Connecting with people, I think, is huge, and I've done that. I've been able to connect with amazing amounts of people, but really I could do that in other ways too. So it's not necessarily...
You could do it on your PC. But getting back to your original question, there isn't a lot of processing that you do. I think the greatest use of particularly an iPad is to read the newspaper. Because the compound effect of that on the environment, on the businesses, on the newsprint business, they don't need as many staff, they don't need trucks, you don't have a recycle bin full of paper every 2 weeks to put out with the rubbish. And you just download it and read it. For me personally, I like reading the traditional newspaper in the traditional newspaper form on the iPad. I don't like where they've changed it to a web page because I'm not used to that, reading that format. I like to be able to read page 1 to page 60, and the journalist has worked out what the important stuff is, or I know where the business section's coming up or whatever. But have it all thrown at you, I think, is a bit confusing.
Well, it's funny to think, I just, there's a book by Nancy Duarte called Resonate. It's an ebook, and it's got so much more. Someone was just telling me about it that I need to still download it for the iPad because it's got so much multimedia experience. And I think that's the cool thing that we see. It's not necessarily that much of an improvement, but it makes it a lot more interactive and hopefully better as far as learning. And I see that stuff being really cool. But like you said, it's more like convenience and cool stuff instead of like life-changing, oh my goodness, I'm going to work differently nowadays.
Yeah, you've got to be careful you don't get wrapped up in this stuff and start wasting lots of energy and time doing things, differently for the sake of doing it differently. And what you say, I don't know, Rupert Murdoch launched that new paper called The Daily, which is driven around all sorts of multimedia and video and stuff like that. But personally, again, I prefer to just press download the paper, go and get a cup of coffee, come back, walk away with it, be able to sit there and read it. But if you're doing all this multimedia stuff and you haven't got good web access and you click on a video and all of a sudden it's gone away for a minute or two to download a video, it slows your day down. It doesn't give you that you end up a slave to a tool, not the tool giving you information that you need quickly.
Yeah, that's the problem in general. Okay, so let's go. I want to talk about one more thing before we end, because I know you do have to get going in a little bit, but you talked about mentors. And I really want to ask you about how you found your mentors and how you sort of form that relationship. Because a lot of people ask me, well, wait, how did you get your mentors? Especially because it's not as though we're going and finding a coach, a business coach, and then paying them. Mentors to me are totally different. And I think they're different too because we talked about it before. So how did you get your mentors, and sort of if you have any advice for anyone listening on them?
Well, my first mentor was working at the radio station that I first worked at when I left school at 15, and he just inspired me. He was a grumpy old 60-year-old man that had been retired. It sounded old then, but it's not now when I'm getting close to it. But he and I, we'd go to lunch every day to a place in Melbourne called Pellegrini's, where I'm actually going to go today and have a bowl of spaghetti because I'll be in the city. And that was just 35 odd years ago, and we'd talk about life and his experiences in radio. He'd come from the old school, and every year he would go to Hawaii for 3 or 4 weeks, and he'd come back looking like he'd been under a sun lamp, and he just talking about his stories of Hawaii just inspired me to explore California. So I came all the way over there as a 16 or 17-year-old on a paid 21-day tour that I saved up my money and bought, and that led to me being interviewed for a job in Santa Clara, which is where I worked for a year. So one thing sort of led to the other, and it's hard to connect the dots going forward, but it's easy when you have done it, and to connect them backwards. And through just, he was a mentor because I was listening to what he was doing, his life experiences. I then got one of my first customers when I started my business, a little Greek guy, Concolurgis, and he turned up in a Porsche with gold all over him, leathers, and gave me an order in 1986 for $110,000 computer system, which was a lot of money then, a lot. And when we became friends, and are still friends. He actually became a partner for a while, but I bought him out. Other mentors I've had, I would say, observing someone like Rupert Murdoch, only because he's from our hometown, Melbourne, and how successful he's been and what he does. You just you observe what they do and how they do it. And you may not be able to do the same things or replicate because you may not have the staff, or you might not have the guts to bet everything every time. You think there's a point where you get comfortable, and I think that's a very important thing for people, is to accept their comfort level and not be driven by what they see around them, because a lot of it is timing and luck, and you've got to have the vision and the drive, and you'll always achieve a degree of success. But to achieve mega success like the Steve Jobs of the world, that involves a lot of other circumstantial stuff. And I went and heard Steve Wozniak talk about 3 weeks ago, and after his talk, I actually went and spoke to him because his description of the 70s for him was very similar to me. He had an electronics background. He used to play with little Heath kits and put stuff together, and which I used to do, which is why I ended up working as a radio engineer and so on and so forth. And he was an engineer at Hewlett-Packard, and someone introduced him to Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs could see his engineering ability. Steve Jobs had zero engineering ability.
It's crazy to hear. Yeah.
Ability. But he had an eye for design, and a bit like the likes of Donald Trump, near enough wasn't good enough. He'd make them redo it every time until it was perfect. It was almost an obsession. And Wozniak had put together this little 8-bit computer, and the Apple, I think it was 8-bit, the Apple I and then Apple II, and Jobs basically created an injector molding case around it. And they, by circumstance, sold a heap of them to Sunnyvale Computers, and the rest is history. But it took Jobs 5 goes to get Wozniak to join him.
Oh, really?
Wozniak wanted a career at Hewlett-Packard. He was happy at Hewlett-Packard. He didn't want to leave Hewlett-Packard. He didn't see an opportunity. And Jobs pestered the hell out of him, and finally he joined him. And if that had not happened, I would suspect that Wozniak would still be an engineer at Hewlett-Packard, and Jobs probably would have ended up being a car salesman or something similar, because it was what I started with the whole conversation. It's the coming together of the right individuals with the right skills, that the combination of the two created more than two things. Greater, the sum of the parts was greater than their share. And so where I started with this is that, and something that I've learned as I've gotten older is greed and watching successful people, not so much too closely, but thinking you can replicate what they did can actually make you quite miserable. It's actually sitting down and dissecting how they've done it and reading all the information about it, and then sitting back and saying, would you have done that? And if you say, no, that's not my nature, then accept who you are and do what you know best and be very happy with that, because otherwise you'll be forever miserable if you measure yourself against someone else's success. Because there's a lot in that.
Yeah, definitely. That's great advice. And I want us, for the last question that I always ask for everybody, and I didn't give you a heads up. Usually I give people a heads up. I always ask, what's one action that listeners can take this week to help move them forward towards their goal of $1 million?
You're right. You didn't give me a heads up.
I know. Usually I do. I'm so sorry. I'll buy you a drink next time you're in Maine.
Is to focus on the purpose of why you're doing it. Because if you focus on the purpose of why you're doing something, now in my case, the purpose was in financial independence. So I never found myself in the situation that my father's was in. And that'll get you through the tough times, and it will also make you aligned with, and it's important if that purpose is also aligned with your customers' needs, if that's possible. Now, you might say, my financial independence is not aligned with my customers' need. Too right it is. I'm a small software business. If I'm not financially independent, I go out of business. I got a lot of very at sea customers. So, there are lots of other purposes in our lives and purposes why we do things. But you've got to have the core purpose of why you're doing it and why you want to be successful. And if you can't articulate that enough, then in a lot of people's cases, they'd be better off actually potentially going back to base and getting closer to that purpose and getting a job in the meantime. Because a lot of people that are stuck in small businesses and they bought themselves a job and they're miserable.
Yeah,
And
I've heard that too much. Yeah.
They're not going to make $1 million doing that. They'd be better off saying, I really don't know why I'm doing this, and sucking it up and moving on. It's like, when you buy a bad stock, it's very hard to sell it for a loss.
Easier to keep it and see it keep going down than to sell it and know that.
Well, it's also a matter of, is that going to go up faster than something else you might put money into that might go up faster? Yeah. So it's leveraging where you're going to get the greatest return. But if you ask me that, I would say be prepared to work 16 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week. Focus on where you can get your best return during business hours. Do the stuff that you don't need to do during business hours, after hours, and keep at it, because success comes after. It's the old adage, 10,000 hours takes a musician to know what they're doing. You read so much about the rule of 10,000 hours, and it's the same in business.
Yeah. Oh, I've heard that so many times from the millionaire interviews. It's just crazy. So hammering it into our heads is really good, because otherwise we won't do it. Otherwise we assume we can do it without it. My 20 hours a week. It's going to take me a really long time to get 10,000 hours. also extend that a bit, Jaime. And it's something I've done once. I sold my business and I bought it back 4 years later, and I've invested money. I've lost millions of dollars in investments along the way, but I've made more than I've lost, fortunately. And I was approached last year to sell the business for 2-digit million sum in the second decade of 2 digits, and I thought, oh yeah, it's all right. But then when you sit down and look at it, in order to, what would you do with that money to make the money? Because it's always sold on a multiple, and what would you do to make the money? The same sort of money. And by the time you pay capital gains tax, and if it's 10, 20, $30 million, it still doesn't matter. In order for you to maintain that net present value and make income, you've got to make high 20% returns in an area that you do not know. Yeah.
And if you look at the business you created and it's in an area that you do know and do know backwards, why would you get off that and go and try to do something else? And for a lot of us, it's a self-esteem thing that we can't believe the success we've created, and we still have that niggling self-doubt. So if someone else is prepared to pay you for some money and you go, sure, cool, I got out of that, get yourself to that, but into something more difficult. So it's a matter of being in touch with the timing in life when you do build up and sell a business, because everybody, or a lot of people, particularly groups, mentoring groups, talk about, preparing your business for sale. Always, what's your exit strategy, and all those sort of things. And I think it's good to have a little bit of a focus on that, so that you know what you're striving for. But that's really your vision. But not to jump at everything unless you're in a buggy whip manufacturing business. If you're in a business that's going along and growing, stick to what you know, because you'll end up in an area where you don't know what you're doing. You'll get conned by people, quick returns, and why invest in someone else's dream when you've got yours now, and stick to it. It's worth. So
that's really interesting.
And a lot of people just don't see it that way. They say, oh boy, I've built this business up. Someone's prepared to give me $20 million. Well,
yeah,
what's going
take it and run. They're like, woohoo, let me take it and run. Don't think about after. And then you sort of hit yourself with the rest of it.
Yeah. So you've got to make a net return after tax, to do with a lifestyle, with a lessening sense of purpose in your life. There's only a certain amount of international travel you can do, of sitting around doing nothing. So you'll get antsy, you'll want to do something. What do you then do? Go into something you don't know. You don't know, you get into strife. So it surprises me that our culture is, to sell your business.
Okay, I have one more follow-up question. I know you only have a second. So if you were to sell your business, though, I mean, there's so many people, like entrepreneurs have ADD where they have 1,000 business ideas. So some want to just switch over to one and go ahead and go that route. Are you not like that? Because you said you're a dreamer. I'm surprised you wouldn't want to sell and then start something new from the ground up.
No, I wouldn't want to start something from the ground up, because it's a 10-year, 15-year rule.
Yeah.
And I read somewhere that the most important thing that Steve Jobs used to do, spend most of his day doing, was saying no to things.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Andrew. And we have a giveaway for the books. He sent me a bunch of books, so go ahead and check it out on the website. If you go to eventualmillionaire.com and comment on this one, you could win a book from Andrew. Thank you so much. Is there any way we can reach you online, or can you give us your website address so we can check it out?
Sure, Jaime. It's my website is www.andrewdarbyshire.com, which is AndrewDarbyshire.com.
Awesome. I'll definitely link it up too so everybody can click on it and check it out. And so go ahead and comment so you can win a book. And thank you so much for coming on today, Andrew.
Thanks, Jaime.
Just a note, you can download the top 10 tips from these millionaire interviews on the blog.
Thanks for listening. You can find out more great information like this on eventualmillionaire.com.